we can go from left to right. If you just want to tell us a little bit about yourselves, we'll be very glad to hear.
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Doug Jensen. I am Senior Vice President of Consumer Marketing Analytics and Innovation Insights at Estee Lauder Companies, which is a beauty company operating in makeup, skincare, fragrance, and hair care. And I have a corporate job across all of our brands to provide analytics and insight support. Nice to be with you all.
Hey everyone, this is Rachel Stein. I apologize, I will be on video in a moment. A fire alarm keeps going off in my building, so I had to step outside for a second. I'm a second-year consultant at Boston Consulting Group. I split time between our Boston and New York offices. I have focused my career up to this point on digital transformation and retail, and a huge percentage of that has been digital marketing acceleration and building out test and learn agendas and experimentation priorities with our clients. So excited to be here and look forward to chatting with you all today.
Great. Hi, everyone. Hannah Yankelevich. I'm an associate partner at McKinsey and focus all of my work for the past 7 years really in the apparel go-to-market space. So helping clients basically infuse data along every step of the apparel go-to-market. So basically everything from sketch of a garment all the way through to rack, and how do you infuse data, both consumer insights data, past retail sales data, as well as using predictive analytics to help inform best places to make big bets in apparel and footwear. Excited to be here.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing so we can all see each other better.
Look at all those beautiful faces.
Thank you for having your cameras on. It helps a lot for the panelists and for the session directors to see so many people engaged. Okay, so why don't we just jump right into data? Can you tell us a bit about what is the strategy of your company when it comes to working with data? Do we want to go in the inverse order maybe now?
Sure, I could start. Broad question. I would say, how do we work with data and analytics? I would say it's really infused in every role within McKinsey. But we do have, so we have different types of roles at McKinsey. We've got what we call our integrative consultants, which are focused on client delivery, right? So those are the folks who are working on specific client projects and moving from client project to client project. Obviously, tons of data in any type of client work that we do. And those are, analysts, associates, even myself, I'm in Tableau like every single day. But then we also actually have a digital arm called Digital McKinsey. And that's where all of our, I would say, like advanced analytics, data scientists, engineers sit that work on building a lot of our proprietary data solutions or data sets that focus on, again, individual solutions, whether it be anchored in a particular industry or serving a particular function. So for example, I work very closely with our advanced analytics team in marketing and sales, and we develop assets or solutions that are very specific to solving specific problems or challenges that we know that clients have. So for example, I do a ton with them on merchandising planning, right? So how do you basically forecast what's the right inventory to buy into for said specific season, for example. And so those are, I would say, the heart and brains, if you will, of a lot of our data offerings. But I'd say, data and analytics is a huge part of everybody's day-to-day. Even me as an associate partner, as I mentioned, we get into quite depths of data, and I just geek out all the time.
Thank you. Before we go to Rachel, I just want to let everybody know that you can leave your questions on the Tableau chat. We would love to get to your questions, so just drop them there and we'll see like the most common and get them at the end. Okay, Rachel, you can go.
Awesome, I just got inside. So at Boston Consulting Group, there's a lot of ways in which we use data and analytics. As a consultant, it's a core part of your job to have analytics proficiency, be able to do you know, basic analysis in Excel, Alteryx, get stuff on slides, kind of get clients aligned to what you're saying. But I think when working in the digital practice area specifically, there's an additional need to be data fluent. You know, I think in my experience, a lot of the time we're coming into client environments where they may have some data and analytics capabilities, but often they need a lot of help to get from kind of their V1, like their working version internally, to kind of hitting best in class. So I think it's always been a consultative approach in my experience where you meet clients where they're at, but also help them see the future. And I've enjoyed staying really close to the data throughout my career. I think it's, while all consultants are using data in some formats, like being really in the weeds has been a really fulfilling experience.
So let me start by just telling you what I do at my job. And I have a little bit of a different profile than my colleagues. So at Estee Lauder Companies, I've been there 7 years, and I came to the client side at a company called Avon for 7 years before that. And I started my career in marketing analytics, essentially at AC Nielsen and Information Resources, which are two providers in the market research space. But I've always been in analytics. So I was brought to Estee Lauder Companies about 7 years ago in the prestige beauty area. Essentially, beauty brands have always thought that they know how to market to consumers. And it's only when you have people like our CEO, Fabrizio Frede, who came from Procter & Gamble, coming into a beauty company and wanting to instill the kind of fact-based decision-making that he experienced at P&G. And that's what he started to bring those capabilities to Estee Lauder Companies. So my day-to-day job has I wear about 5 different hats. I'm in charge of the share reporting globally, which isn't very sexy, but it's incredibly important. And we live and breathe and die by our share information. Secondly, I look after our social media measurement, which includes social listening. So I'm a big fan of using social listening tools to uncover what consumers are talking about, both from a product as well as a corporate reputation perspective. The third thing I do, and actually the reason why I was brought into the company, is marketing mix modeling, which is econometric models that measure the return on investment of your advertising and promotion spend. Many of you may have heard of that. A lot of people say that kind of technique is dead, but I can vouch for the industry that it's actually quite alive, and we use it pretty regularly. The fourth thing I do is in the CRM area, CRM standing for Consumer Relationship Management. So that's the collection of data of individual consumer purchase transactions. And then what I do specifically there is to work with our brands to make sure that they have retention marketing strategies, which includes making sure that we can personalize the touch to what a consumer wants from us. But the fun part of that is I do analytics that really look at new consumers and what's their purchase pathway to becoming loyal. And then the fifth thing I do is what I call innovation insights, which is consumer insights in the innovation area. So that includes understanding attitude and usage studies to really understand how are consumers purchasing different categories and subcategories, and how do people build regimens. So I actually think I have even within someone who has my job at a different company, my scope is much different. And then that's just what I do. And what I'd say is, as a company, we have really focused on a larger data and analytics strategy. So just recently, I now report into Jane Lauder, who is the granddaughter of the founder. Estee Lauder was actually a woman who started the company. And now I work for Jane Lauder, who's the head of enterprise marketing and our chief data officer. For the first time, our company established, a role where data is in the title. So that's really cool for me, because I've been kind of doing all the stuff I do, working with brands, but now we're putting one person in charge of that entire data strategy, which we can talk about during today's session.
That's great. And that is something also Rachel mentioned about clients. Sometimes they have a different maturity level in data analytics than the one you have on your firm. So we would like to know, what is the maturity level on your firm, and how, in the case of Hannah and Rachel, how do you deal with that when you go to a client and maybe they're thinking they want to do marketing experiments, but they don't have the infrastructure? So Hannah, Rachel. Oh, Rachel, you're on mute.
Yeah, I can start there. So, I think I would say BCG as a whole is pretty mature and advanced when it comes to data and analytics. We have a massive team on our business services side of our operations that helps us create digital maturity assessment for clients, deploy a pretty broad set of advertising technology and operations software. So we're at a pretty down the line place. We also embed experimentation into like BCG's own marketing practices, which I'm not as close to as a consultant, but it's something that we really follow best practices, I think, internally. I think often when I'm coming into clients, they're somewhere on the curve where it's rare to encounter a company that doesn't have any type of data and analytics capabilities. Like most companies, just by nature of having an email program and a website, have some sort of data centralization and aggregation and automation. But I think it's, when we come into clients, it's pretty rare to find companies that are fully on the other end of maturity, where things are fully automated, fully personalized in a one-to-one way. There's cross-channel data communication happening, so things are not being built out in silos. And I think when coming into an environment like that, like the first step is always a diagnostic, like really getting critical from both conversations with clients, diving into their tech stack, and benchmarking against industry peers, like where do they sit on the path to maturity? And then thinking through like what are the costs and trade-offs involved with proceeding down this path? Because it's not easy to go from a pretty limited tech stack to something that is fully built out. But for many clients, it is kind of a part of their longer term transformation journey. I think often when I've come into clients, if we're doing like a 6-month engagement, often the first month or so is dedicated to diagnostic. The next 4 months are really dedicated to proving out the value of driving a more advanced data and analytics program in the marketing function via pilots and experimentation. And then the last month or so is making process recommendations and outlining the path to further upskilling. So I think, it takes some time to get people behind the value of transformation. Pilots in marketing can really help with that, to show that, if you adjust the way you're doing things and move towards a more advanced part of the digital maturity curve, you're actually generating real upside and real engagement with your customers. But it is a consultative process that can often take many months to even show the initial value.
Okay. Hannah, do you want to chime in on that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would echo a lot of what Rachel's saying. I think the important thing to start with is like, how do you actually define maturity, right? Because I think there's a lot of different angles that it can go. You can have, folks who have tons of capabilities, right? And can, are beasts in Excel, for example, right? I've come across client situations in which, it could be, they've got great capabilities on their team, but they don't necessarily have a data infrastructure. That's probably the biggest challenge, I think, in working with clients in particular is, especially in the retail space, if you're not sort of a newer digital first type of brand, right, you've got some pretty broken data infrastructure. And a lot of that is, helping them anchor in a single source of truth. Because it's awesome to have a bunch of data and be able to run a bunch of, algorithms or advanced analytics on it. If the data's bad, it doesn't really matter, right, what you do with it, right? So the biggest thing oftentimes that we start with is anchoring in like, what is the maturity of their data? Is there a single source of truth, right? How reliable? What's the data integrity? And making sure, right, there is a single source of truth across functions as a reference point. And then work to build on, okay, is it a, infrastructure thing on, right, you have the right tools in place, or is it more of a capability, or sometimes both? And I would say on average in retail, I'd say the maturity is actually like pretty low, right? There's a lot of, and folks who have worked in retail probably know this way better than I do, right? But there's a lot of disparate systems that don't talk to each other. And, you've got your folks on the COG side and they're using one reference point of data. And then you've got your folks on the sales side, right? Or, your merchants, for example, and they're looking at sales data and those two pieces don't talk together, right? So that's really oftentimes where we start on how do you create that linkage, because that then becomes more powerful. Everybody's anchoring in one set of a single source of truth, because then, it starts to unlock a lot of different things. Because the biggest challenge is you can go run, again, a bunch of fun, fancy analytics on, usage or even sales trends or trying to predict sales trends. But, oftentimes it'll be like, well, what was the data system you used? Oh, we don't look at that system. So that's not the one, you know, and then it just, the conversation goes sideways from there, right? So a lot of it is starting to help them build the maturity from a standpoint of data integrity, to create a similar starting point. And then we build on top of that. And a lot of what we anchor on, similarly, I think to what Rachel said, not surprisingly, right, is what we call like agile sprints, right? So how can you do very quick, rapid sprints or pilots in, you know, short time periods, and basically build on those pilots each time based on what you're learning, right? And so it could be everything from, right, what are you merchandising in the store, to, you know, what are the, you know, ways that you are providing product recommendations on a website, right? And it really runs the gamut within that. But I think that the biggest notion that we've really been trying to, especially in this environment, with clients I've worked with, is the notion of, you know, test fast and fail fast, right? To be able to then hopefully be more agile and really actually responding to consumer preferences and demand at a much faster rate than they, you know, had traditionally thought about it.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I also believe that the output is only as good as the input. So
Exactly.
you have to work on that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think that what they both, Hannah and Rachel both talked about it, is right on. Understanding your data maturity level. When you're inside, in-house, in an analytics function, as I am, one of the things that I do is to really try to figure out what are the burning business questions. And, you know, I think less about single version of truth or where the data sits, and think about what is the business question that we're trying to address. And then, you know, you figure out your tool suite or tool set to analyze those things. So I mentioned that I do share reporting, and actually the first thing when I joined the company 7 years ago that I was told to do from the CFO was, can you build a data infrastructure to report our market share? And I kind of scratched my head and said, oh my goodness, this company's been around for a long time and you're asking me to solve that basic question. And I was a little deflated, to be honest with you. But then I thought, you know what, that's actually a nice objective, because it's something pretty simple. It actually turned out to be not simple, but it in concept was simple. And then once we built a harmonized global data system, and the reason why it wasn't simple is I had to harmonize market share data across 4 different companies for 22 countries. And what that involved was making sure that the category and subcategory definitions could talk to each other, and that a given product, you know, Estee Lauder makes advanced night repair, and it can be in Spanish from the Spanish system, and French from the French system, and how do you, you know, make a common thread to that. And so anyway, it took me 2 years to build it, and it's built, and now everyone relies on it. So we actually start with that as a foundational idea, and we rely, as I said before, we live and breathe on our market share. So at the same time I was putting that in the water, then I was going, and actually for me, I'm really passionate about the marketing mix modeling area. So I actually independently then went to each brand president and said, I actually came to the company to build this capability. Here's what it is. What I found is I had to teach people why they should care. And that was super interesting. So I can run this model for you, and it will actually optimize your entire advertising and promotion budget. Would that be interesting to you? Well, who would say no to that? And then I actually own the budget to actually do that for you. So there's no cost to you as a brand president to fund that for me. Who would say no to that? So basically then started to do that kind of work. And then every other lane of the 5 different parts of my job that I do really started that way. So it's really, for me, being an analytics person in-house, it was really listening and going to brands and saying, what is it that you need help with? At the same time, our CEO is really data savvy, and so he realized there's other capabilities that we as a company need to build. And not that I was personally involved in this other part, but in the innovation area, how could we bring all the data from a subcategory segment perspective, understand consumer insights, and actually figure out where are white space opportunities? So that is another area as a company we're really focused on. I get excited about this area, and I know a lot of you might be determining like where to go, and maybe you're currently working on the client side. So I will tell you that I started my career on the vendor side. I learned how to do and run models, and over time moved to the client side. And I'd say that path really worked for me, because then I could bring the expertise in analytics to the company, and then I would work with other vendors who I would have, you know, been myself in the past. So I always think that kind of journey makes sense. And I know Hannah and Rachel are not on the vendor side, they're on a consultant side, but even that has value because I think you learn a variety of different industries and a variety of different companies. And that kind of variety of experience, I think, is valuable. And so think about that in your careers to see whether you want to go and get experiences across industries, because when you come into a company, then you want to go deep like I'm doing. So I've been in the beauty industry now for 15 years, and there's really great depth that you can get, but I only got there by having the expertise across clients and across industries to get in the door to the job I have today.
Okay, that actually brings us into our next question. So we have the data, we have the maturity level. Now it comes time to data visualization and storytelling. How do we do it? So first I wanted to kick this off, like, can you share a story or occasion where data visualization and storytelling actually help you bring value either to your company or a client? I think we talked a little bit about this, with Doug, so maybe you wanna.
Well, it's a really interesting question. And let's talk first about data visualization and the foundation by which you want to tell your story. So we actually have a company philosophy of we're fairly agnostic about the tools that we use. We're a Tableau house, but we're also a Power BI house, and our technology folks actually think both are great. And so I have a team of about 15 people, and probably half of them know how to create Tableau dashboards. And I think that's very smart because the more you can actually do it yourself, I think that's really good. But to me, the visualization is only the first step. I think the real power is when you have a suite of analysts who can go through the information and really glean the insight to serve up to answer the business question. And a brand president in my case could care less about the dashboards that we build. They really just want their teams to get the answers and provide the next generation of the innovation or the next way to kind of launch this other commercial innovation. So it's really a means to an end. And actually what I get more excited about is making sure that my team has all the tools that they need, not on data visualization, but like other tools, like social listening tools, for example, where you can go in and really uncover what are consumers saying about your product. We mine Reddit and other blogs. We mine ratings and reviews websites. There's such wealth of information that you can just go and observe publicly and then scrape and say, what are those conversations about, and what are the white space opportunities that's someone's complaining about your product, or actually more importantly, they're using your product in a way that you never envisioned. And so how can you pivot to how they talked about using your product? Or they complain about something. Let's say you make a moisturizer and it's making me break out, and you really need to listen. Are a lot of people who are using that product complaining about it's too oily and that it's causing breakouts, which is kind of obvious. But then what we do is benchmark to say, okay, is that product doing worse than any other product? And I'm just giving you some really small, easy examples, but for me is more about using tools to get to either an untapped opportunity and the insight that's there, or answering a true business question.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I would echo a lot of what Doug's saying. I think there's a difference, right, in terms of how we potentially problem solve internally with our working team versus what do we actually take to the client. So oftentimes what we'll do, and I mentioned Tableau, is as me and my team of consultants, what we'll do is we'll actually pull up Tableau very much like this, or even when we were in person in a team room, we would put it up on, get a projector and have it on the wall. And we use that as the foundation, right, in terms of being able to help craft the story, right? So let's get a lay of the landscape. What if you cut the data this way? Because Tableau is just a really great tool in terms of being able to interact with the data and do very quick cuts and understand, right, trends very quickly. So we do anchor quite a lot in that, in terms of very fast, rapid problem solving of, trying to understand, right, quick insights, and ultimately what is the data telling us, right? In terms of how we take it to clients, it really depends on the audience, and a little bit of link to the question that we were talking about before in terms of maturity, right? Part of it is understanding, like, what is the data culture already inherent in the client, right? How do they think about metrics? How do they Do they have dashboards already set up? And what is the best way to help them storytell? So, I've done everything from setting up or customizing a Tableau dashboard that is built specifically for each of the functions that is the way that they build that sort of single source of truth, all the way to just straight up in good old traditional PowerPoint, right? And I think it's probably anchors more on the PowerPoint, right? Or we use Prezzo a lot. I don't know if folks are familiar with that, but that's like a fun way to be able to do, it's like more interactive PowerPoint where it does like cool visualizations where you go in and out. But that's also something that we use in terms of helping to make the data more approachable, because a lot of times, right, if you're showing up with a bunch of charts, it's hard to get the so what, right? Like the actual story that you're trying to tell. And so oftentimes, especially if you're, at a board level or C-suite level, right, a lot of it is like very infographic-y, right? Like big numbers and, a pithy bullet on what the so what is. And that's like the extent of the data visualization, down to when you're getting into the actual working team that's operating business day to day. That's where you get the more advanced data dashboards, where, for example, as I was talking about, us helping to build a customized Tableau dashboard that they would then reference and check every day. And so I think it really depends on ultimately who the end audience is and what is the goal of the conversation.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think I would echo a lot of the process things that Hannah just said. I would add, just because given the question was kind of about a specific example, something I was thinking about is I did 2 years of work with a luxury department store client. And as folks probably know, luxury department stores are broadly declining, like they're generally really struggling in the market. But we were seeing, quarter over quarter, a lot of there was basically flat growth for this company. They weren't significantly growing, they weren't significantly declining. And, their initial response to that, the client team's initial response to that was, screw it, I guess we're not seeing nothing's really happening from all this digital work we're doing. I guess we better do something else. But through the rigorous experimentation design we had built, the holdout statistically significant control groups, the robust dashboards we were able to create to report out on daily, weekly, and quarterly progress, we were able to show them that actually the only reason you're staying flat is because of all the digital transformation you're undertaking with the website improvements, the in-store experience improvements that now link to digital components, the personalized promotions you're pushing out. So it was a situation where if we had not built out a really robust data architecture and really robust reporting suite for them to be able to see the impact of what we were doing, it's possible that they would have stopped the work and walked away and tried something different. But we were able to show them in a defensible way via data visualizations that actually, if you didn't do this, you'd be in a much worse spot. And if you continue to do this, you can at least potentially stay flat instead of declining like the rest of your peers. So I think moments like that where sometimes you're with clients that are on an upward swing and they're growing and you can latch onto it and show really amazing progress. But sometimes, especially with legacy retail clients, it's just stopping the decline and being able to leverage data to show them that they're actually doing something to at least stay afloat has been really meaningful in my career.
Ingrid, I'd like to go back to what Hannah was talking about in terms of using PowerPoint and storytelling there. I think, I don't know if you saw me nodding a lot, that we talk about Tableau or Power BI as visualization tools. And actually that's, as I was kind of saying, a means to an end. So in my day-to-day, I'm probably in PowerPoint every day writing up stories. And actually the construction of how to think about it is, what is the finding and then what's the implication for brand X or for the company? And it sounds really simple, but it's really shocking at sometimes if you don't do that, you're apt to write a finding that has no implication, or as I think Hannah was saying, the so what, or we say the so what, now what. And so by forcing yourself to write it that way, and then getting in front of a brand president or someone very senior and actually presenting that, that's how you actually find out it and make the meaningful business recommendation. And I think that's one of the questions in the chat is, how do you get to that storytelling? Is there is it subjective? Well, for me and for the way that our company thinks, we want to use really strong fact-based decision making and really strong insights to go deep into understanding what the recommendation is. So let's say I'm going to probably provide from an analytics perspective a recommendation, but I'm never going to get into, you know, any kind of creative element, meaning I'm not going to say, here's creatively how you should do that, or here's a packaging recommendation. It's really more about, here's the consumer insight, or here's the thing that consumer is telling us. And really competitor X is actually jumping on that trend. So how can we match that trend? That's more of the storytelling that I'm involved in. And then related to the other question I see in the chat about the legacy system. So yeah, we're a company with lots of legacy systems, and I'm not too bothered by the fact that there are disparate systems. As I was saying before, it clearly depends on what business question you're trying to address. So I mentioned building a market share system. And so we built that, and so that's kind of a self-contained system of understanding what your share is. And then we have a social listening system. But I would say where our next journey or generation of questions are relates to how can we weave together all the different systems. I think that's probably where the question's coming from. And so we feel really good, and I think our maturity is very strong, but that's not to say we don't want to get better. The other thing I just wanted to kind of call out a little cheekily is that I've been around long enough to hear things like big data, and you probably are too young, most of you, to even know that terminology. So no one uses the big data terminology. Now they talk about AI or other things related to machine learning. And my only counsel is don't get swayed into the sexy talk of all this space. At the end of the day, all people really want is an answer to a business question. And you want to make more money, you want to increase your market share. And so I would just counsel all of you not to get too hung up on either where the data infrastructure is sitting and how to make that better, but rather do what I was telling you I did in my journey. Answer very specific questions that are being told to you, and check those off and start to build relationships. And over time, you will then have the groundswell support to get the data infrastructure where you want it to go. The worst thing you could do is be a new person coming into a company and saying, let me see the data landscape. Oh no, we need to go and move that to the next level. That'll never work because you haven't proven how you can use the existing systems. And when we speak a lot about, well, why would we invest in the next generation what are we using? How are we getting, our current systems, how are we making them sweat is kind of how we talk about that.
Yeah, I would just double exactly what Doug just said in terms of, I think the most important thing is really getting super clear on what is the question that you're trying to answer. Because we've got data coming up the wazoo, right? Whether it's a company's own specific data or data coming from third parties, right? There's a new, I feel like, startup every day that can do some fancy web scraping that, again, will tell you, one perspective of what's happening. And then you've got your social media analysis over here. And then you've got your own consumer survey that you ran. And then you've got, McKinsey coming in and saying, well, we ran this consumer survey and here's what that says, right? And so I think the biggest thing is, right, data is never a problem, right? You always have ample amounts of data. But the hardest part, right, especially when you are trying to drive an organization forward, whether it's your own company or you're consulting for a company, right, is getting very clear on what are you actually specifically trying to answer, and ultimately, what do they then do about it, right? And one thing that I always start my conversations with clients is I have a caveat page, right? That's at the very front. That is right, we know data is imperfect. Here's exactly where this data came from, and calling out up front, right? Here are probably, some assumptions that we need to make because this data, for example, we just fielded this huge survey in a COVID period, right? That's going to have a ton of COVID sentiment noise in it, right? Just being upfront about some of the inconsistencies or imperfections of the data as well, I think is really important too. And then getting really tight on what is it you're specifically trying to answer versus trying to bring, right, every answer to every question that might be out there, because then you lose, right, the forest for the trees.
Okay, I think the biggest takeaway is that we need to answer the question. And I'm going to follow that with a question that many MBAs without a strong background in data analytics or engineering have, and is, how much are you using data analytics tools in your everyday work?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, I'm in my second year as a consultant at BCG, which is 2 years after most folks enter from the MBA. So still pretty close to that timeline. And I would say, you know, every single day I'm using analytics, and I would say people see me as an advanced analytics person because I know how to use Alteryx, SQL, Python, and R. And that's like not a particularly advanced suite of programming languages, but it's enough to be able to really dive into data. And then I find myself periodically also using Tableau, and then some statistical analysis tools like SPSS. But like, it's not like any of those programming languages are ones that are particularly hard to learn. They're things that have very clear-cut data analytics use cases. And just knowing that suite of programming languages and softwares has allowed me to really stand out in terms of coming on the ground and being able to really provide a deeper level of analytics support when we're running diagnostics or trying to build out preliminary data science recommendations with clients. I know with BCG as well, having that type of skill set allows you to do casework with our Gamma data science analytics team. So it's, you know, it's not much, but it's enough to get in the door. I would say the bare minimum for people coming into consulting is that you're going to be using at least Excel and PowerPoint to like do basic analysis and tell stories. But if you can teach yourself a few additional skills, it does open up staffing opportunities for you.
Go next. I mean, in my day-to-day, right, I use a ton of analytical tools, more so right when I was an early consultant, and in my previous work experience, I worked at Google for about 5 years prior to business school, and I was in SQL all the time back then, because I mean, at Google you just have so much data, right? I mean, there's just so much there. But you know, in my more now, what I focus on is helping the team to glean out like what is the question that we're trying to answer, and how do we best answer it in a simple yet, you know, thought-provoking way. And so a lot of what I spend in my tenure now is, you know, heavy in you know, Tableau, in terms of being able to do quick iterative problem solving. But when I was more, I think just echoing a ton of what Rachel said, you know, my first 2 years as a consultant, you know, I was using Alteryx a lot. Tableau was sort of more in the nascency when it was just coming to market, for when I was an associate. But I think the other big thing is, I mean, it's heavy in Excel, right? The one thing is Excel is a universal language. That the hardest part when you're trying to serve a company too, right, is you want to give them something that they will own, right? Our approach to client impact is we're trying to constantly put ourselves out of a job, right? We're trying to build the client capabilities so that they don't need us anymore, and that they can sustain it and build, you know, continue to build it on their own. And the universal common language when you go to any company is Excel, right? And so unless they're really advanced and going farther than that, a lot of it is, you know, how do you make it something that's accessible to multiple people within an organization? And oftentimes it's
So in my case, I have a team, and the team is using Tableau to do analysis, as I mentioned. Then we would go in those market share companies where we buy data for, they have their own software where you go in to grab the data. So I think my team is in that a lot. In the social media space, there are lots of tools that we use to assess what consumers are saying there. So a social listing tool that assesses your owned, meaning what a brand publishes. There are tools called Social Bakers and Sprinkler that evaluate what consumers are saying. And then in terms of social listening, there's about 10 different companies in that space, NetBase, Conversian, and so on. In the CRM space, that's a whole different area to think about, where you've got databases and structure. I think there was a question again about the tech stack. So we actually have decentralized all of our CRM, but we're trying to harmonize that through cloud-based platforms in the future. And so then we've got to build campaign management systems that sit on top of those cloud-based systems in terms of the CRM space. Let's see what else. So marketing mix modeling, I actually don't do that in-house. I use a vendor. And actually the other thing I would say is when you're on the client side, you're probably going to hire a vendor to do some analysis for you. And so then you kind of don't care what tools they have. But every day my team is in Excel, and every day my team is in PowerPoint, and I'm personally in both Excel and PowerPoint, and of course Outlook. So I think that's obvious. But I think Hannah and Rachel both talked about other data wrangling tools like Alteryx. I think knowing those kind of things could be helpful, and SQL. And actually, I should have said this. I started my very first job as a SAS coder. SAS or SPSS are very similar tools. So I guess it really depends on the kind of company you start with, and you basically learn the tools that they provide to you. And I think that's probably the biggest thing to think about.
Yeah. The only thing I would add on that, and I meant to mention it, is, I mean, when I came to McKinsey, like, I didn't know Alteryx or Tableau or any of that kind of stuff, right? I think just to emphasize that whatever organization you decide to join, they're going to have, right, some of those tools inherent. And I don't think that there's any, you know, unless you're going for like a super technical, super, you know, data scientist oriented, you know, role. I think the notion is there's a lot of like learning on the job that happens. And I think we invest a ton, especially within, you know, your first year of on the job training, and then just, you know, individual training opportunities, right, to get deep into whatever said data system it may be. And I think it's fairly common at other, you know, consulting type company, or you know, joining directly into a company like an Estee Lauder, for example.
Okay, we've mentioned a lot of tools, and there is one question in the chat. If we are going to learn one tool in business school, if we want to, you know, increase our toolbox for data analytics, which one would you recommend?
I think.
Oh, go ahead.
I think we kind of already talked about it in the tool suites that we've been talking about. I would say Tableau for me would be something to consider, only because as a company, no one at our company talked about Tableau until about 2 years ago. So in this moment in time, I actually think that's smart. And that assumes that everyone knows PowerPoint and Excel. So if you're not like completely proficient in that, that would be the first thing. And then Tableau is what I would say.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is, like, even if you used Excel in a prior job, getting yourself to be like an advanced user or a power user of Excel can dramatically increase your productivity. I came into BCG like knowing the basics, would call myself probably intermediate, but by taking intentional courses and pushing myself to learn tips and tricks and shortcuts and advanced features in Excel, you know, I can do things now in like 25% of the time that I used to. So spending time on that is also important.
I mean, I would just echo everything. I think the biggest thing, right? I mean, I thought I was pretty great at Excel when I, you know, came to McKinsey, just based on my experience at Google. But it's very different, right, in terms of what your day-to-day is. But at Google, what I was doing is basically analyzing huge sets of data. You know, when I came to McKinsey, it was more about building like a, you know, bottoms-up model, right, with like assumptions, right, and less about you know, analyzing rows and rows on data, which is a slightly different skill set, right? It's a slightly different shortcuts or approaches that you might take, right? And so I think that's, you know, getting an all-around toolkit. So I mean, I would definitely say high comfort in Excel is if you're going to spend your time anywhere, and then, you know, I think then branching out from there, like I would say Tableau, maybe Alteryx, but I think Alteryx is pretty intuitive, especially if you got your chops down in Excel.
Let me just add the Excel point. I just want to underscore that. So knowing how to do pivot tables and VLOOKUPs, which are, you know, it goes without saying, those are probably simple things. The other suggestion I have is, and in my case, I find someone that I've hired, and then I discover that they're like this Excel guru. And then I tell everybody else on my team, go sit and shadow that person for a couple hours or a day. Or if they're doing something really fast in Excel, go just ask some questions. How did you do that? I tried to send my team to Excel trainings, and basically it didn't work. We really had to find that expert who can then just on the job teach other people. So if you don't have a best friend, or you don't know anyone who's like that Excel proficient person, go try to find someone and learn from them. And maybe Rachel's one of them. I'm not going to make you all go to Rachel, but it sounds like she probably is that. But like I said, I do think, I feel really strongly that you really have to find someone who can teach you on the job.
Okay, we have another question in the chat, and it says, how do marketers communicate with the data analytics team or the data scientists? And also on the other side, how do you communicate this information to some people who might be less data savvy in the client side?
Well, I'd like to field that first. So I hire people who have a nice blend of being technical, but also can build presentations and do storytelling. I think in this day and age, and probably all of you are like this, you have to have proficiency at analyzing the data, but you don't need to be a data scientist. That's actually something that I'm observing in our company. So there are certain departments, not in mine, where they're hiring these data scientists who are just going and grabbing data. And I think that's fine, but if you as an analyst yourself can go and, as we just talked about, be proficient in Excel, learn Tableau, the more you can do that yourself, because all of you probably are going to do the profile, they're going to be very strong in talking to a business leader. So I would encourage you just to get the technical proficiency to add to what you're probably already really good at, which is talking to people about this, answering business questions, and also relationship building. So all of that is really important. And I'm old enough in my career where I've hired people who were just heads down, like, do the models. And then I tried to put them in front of a business person and they couldn't deal with it. It's probably, again, pretty obvious, but I think that's really important.
I would add, like, from a consulting perspective, you work with all types of organizations, ranging from completely centralized, where they have one center of excellence for marketing and one for data and analytics. And like, there's sometimes project managers that liaise, but they're very separate, to organizations that are completely decentralized and execute marketing as pods that have like one data scientist, one strategist, one ad ops person. So like, there isn't one answer to this question. I think Doug gave one experience that is like from a company, and that's really valuable, but it's super different. And part of your first few months on any job should be really getting to know, like, what are those liaison points, making sure you really get the process and can plug in where you need to. I don't know that I have anything else to add into, like, I think, as Doug said, it's both the storytelling and the basic analytics experiences that are important for anyone in these marketing roles without necessarily having to be a data scientist, but there's no one model for how these teams interact.
Yeah, and I would just encourage, regardless of whatever organization type you go into, right? If you go straight into company or if you do consulting, right? I think the way that you are building your partnership, and with whether you're on the data side or whether you're more on the marketing, business storytelling side, is finding your best friend and working very closely with them in terms of what is possible. So one of the things I did very early on is I actually found someone who's a counterpart of mine, who is embedded in our advanced analytics function. And her and I have sort of grown up together, serving different clients, and we run teams together now. It is a hybrid approach, a little bit of what Rachel was saying about pod, right? So instead of it just being, a traditional McKinsey consulting team where that, is purely client facing, I build hybrid teams, right? So half my team are sort of quote unquote traditional consultants, and the other half of my team are analytics specialists. And we are in the team room every day together. Well, now virtually in a virtual team room every day together, and we problem solve together, right? So everybody is starting from the same starting point of what are the questions that we're trying to answer. And, our data scientists are saying, well, here's what's possible, right? Here's all the different ways that we can use this data. And then they're hearing the types of questions, right, that, our business storytelling consultants are thinking about okay, well, how would we actually translate this into something that, our clients will understand? Like, here's probably the types of questions that we would get, right? And there's like these very robust types of debates and conversations where we then align right on what we're actually going to do. I think those are the types of partnerships that are most effective, right? In terms of breaking down a lot of the communication barriers that oftentimes happen between these different functions, because it's hard to know what you want if you don't know what's available. And also it's hard to answer a question, right, if you don't know exactly what's the goal or what's the intent with that question. So that's what I encourage you, regardless of whatever type of organization you go into, is and you're given, a project or something like that, like, find that best friend, because that's the best way to unlock the power.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and it goes just to what you just said, Hannah. And they're asking, how does a student learn how to answer the business question? How do you develop these soft skills to solve business problems? And if you might have like a a book to recommend for storytelling, but this is about how do we answer the question? How do we know what the question is?
I would say it's a skill set that you develop over time. Like, I think consulting for me was a really strong apprenticeship model where I could work with more senior storytellers and data scientists and analytics folks and really like develop that skill set on my own. You know, at the beginning of my consulting career, it was very much like someone would tell me a question, I would find the answer to the question. And now it's more of a collaborative process where we are co-defining the questions. And even though, you know, I'm as a more junior person, I'm often the person who goes out and answers that question. I'm more involved with like the frameworking and strategy that defines the research questions to begin with. As for the part about the book, my recommendation actually would be to try to find TED Talks and other presentations where people are speaking and using data to illustrate their point. I think doing stuff like that has helped me personally become a more dynamic speaker and like speak to a variety of different audience types who may have less proficiency in the data. One of the bigger issues for me was presenting always was like, when you're really in the weeds on the technical stuff, you can talk about it at that level of detail all day, every day with your like junior to mid-level folks. But really being able to seniorize things and make messy problems clear to more senior audiences is what's very challenging.
I give another recommendation to add on to what Rachel said. LinkedIn Learning has a suite of different curriculum that you can take. We actually, as a company at Estee Lauder, have we use that and actually encourage a lot of our people to self-learn that way. And there's a couple good data storytelling videos that I've seen there. I'd like to give another example to kind of get to this question. So something happened to me actually just this week where an investment firm that covers our industry sent out a report. They had done a survey among Gen Z teens, and this survey ranks brands in terms of popularity. And there was one brand on page 45 of this 85-page deck that jumped from like number 10 to number 1 over a 6-month period. And so our CEO read the report and then fired off an email saying, why did brand X jump to number 1 in the last 6 months? And that became the business question. So then that question got filtered to me and another person. And then the two of us said, well, let's get, you know, our teams together. And about 10 of us sat down in a virtual room 2 days ago and brainstorm on what do we think that brand is doing, from social media to where they're distributed to what their price points are. And actually my next meeting in an hour is to present the outline of what we're actually going to analyze and come back to the CEO on. So that's a really good example. And I think Hannah and Rachel have talked about the collaboration idea. I think that'd be one thing I give you advice on is find a friend at your company that's as smart as you are and work with them and build that relationship and trust. Actually, if I may take 20 seconds to give you some unsolicited advice as someone who's been in the working world for 30 years. 2 things. One, work for a company where the CEO and CFO are data savvy and make decisions based on data. That is transformative for any company. I've worked for companies where that doesn't happen, and your job as an analyst is so much harder when you do all this great work and then your CEO either doesn't care or doesn't take that advice. And then my other piece of unsolicited advice is work in a category that's growing. It's really hard to work for a company in a category that's declining. You will never really win, because if consumer demand is not there, you're only going to cut your costs out of that. So I'm happy right now and where I work, because I'm in a category that's growing. Prestige beauty grows at 5 to 7%. Maybe not right this moment, but it will again. And I have a CEO and a CFO who are incredibly data savvy, so I'm very lucky.
Yeah, only plug I have is, it's an oldie, but it's a goodie, called Say It with Charts. If anyone has ever come across it, I know it's like very old school, but the principles still hold like deeply and drastically in terms of this environment. So just for good old, paperback book, if you're looking for something like that, Say It with Charts is pretty good.
Okay, we want to be mindful of everyone's time. So thank you very much. Thank you to our amazing panelists. Thank you, Matt, our session director. And I hope you had a great time and keep having a great RAMP experience. Remember, this will be recorded and available for everyone to look after. Thank you so much. Bye.